Dolavenana, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Toke Vendilo, good Talatala, the British High Commissioner, Mr. Penrose, and in the sun, of course, welcome to Namoli, the Commissioner Western, the president of the club, and of course all the members and the members of course, the village here in Namoli. Gives me much pleasure to be here. I was all geared up to come and do mangrove planting straight away. That's why I'm dressed up like this. But I'd like to, of course, thank everybody for the ceremony here this morning, in particular to welcome the British High Commissioner. As he said, only I think it was on Wednesday, we had a meeting in our office to discuss about Glasgow and some of the events there. So I mentioned to him and Mr. Penrose, and I said, I'm going off to Namoli to do some mangrove planting. Would you like to join us? So they've come here on short notice, and I'd like to thank them for that. And it's a good initiative. It's also good message also for the youth. And in fact, I was quite amazed when I received the invitation by the youth when they told me that they're going to plant the next 5,000 to make 50,000 mangrove seedlings that they planted. And the fact that most of them are actually still in high school, I really appreciate that, indeed admire their commitment to that. And I think we should all put our hands together for this young group of men. The fact of the matter is that it goes to show that climate change is not about having conferences in places like Glasgow or Bonn or wherever else in the world. It's about very practical, everyday issues that face us. Yesterday I spent a day here in Lautoka going out to all the different Vakavanua places where government has taken a lease to subdivide the land to get people to have their own leases. Places like Lovu, Seaside, Tore, and various other places. And you can actually see the inundation of seawaters coming in. The sea levels are rising. We have identified already about 40 villages that need to be moved to higher ground. We've already moved 6 villages to higher ground because the seawater levels are rising. The temperature in the sea is rising, so it affects fishing. Parts of Australia and the Great Barrier Reef has been bleached. The coral is basically died. It's a nice way of saying the corals are dying. They say it's bleached. Essentially, we are facing those issues globally. So we in Fiji can play our own part too. Our Honourable Prime Minister has been leading the charge. We have made a commitment that by 2050 that we'll have what we call net zero carbon emissions. And we've also made various other commitments in respect of not just relocating people, but in terms of trying to mitigate the climate change. Fiji's focus is adaptation. Adaptation meaning we have to adapt. We have, of course, we're going to get into renewable energy, but most of our issues are to do with adaptation. So we have to build seawalls. We have to deal with the floods. We have the British High Commissioner here. In the cyclone last year, we had rain in 24 hours, and that same amount of rains in London in 1 year. So 1 year's worth of rain in London, we got it in 24 hours in Fiji, in the cyclone. Cyclone Winston, in 36 hours, wiped off 1/3 of the value of our GDP. So you can imagine the impact it has on us, although Fiji's carbon footprint is very little compared to the big countries like, America, China, India, even Europe, UK, and various other places. But we have our part to play. And as has been highlighted, it's the youth really who need to understand this, because they'll be the ones facing the brunt of it. Some of us will die very soon, 20, 30 years' time, hopefully, a bit longer. But the fact of the matter is the young people who will inherit our country. They're the ones who have to deal more with climate change. So how we position ourselves now is critically important. The one last point I'd like to make is that the Climate Change Act was recently passed by Parliament. And there's a lot of opportunities, and I'd like to also appeal to the landowners that they have an opportunity to get some revenue without actually having to exploit your resources. So traditionally when we think of forests, we think we have to cut the timber to get the money. Now you can keep the trees in the ground and get money paid for keeping the trees in the ground. In the same way with this mangrove planting that we have over here, it's become a valuable resource. So essentially Mangroves have what we call a higher rate of sequestration. In other words, as you know, the trees, they suck out the carbon dioxide from the air and they pump out oxygen. Mangroves have a higher rate of sucking out, they can suck in more carbon dioxide than ordinary trees on the ground, on the land. So the sea has a higher rate of sequestration, seagrasses, mangroves, etc. So it is critically important for us to be able to understand that that resource is very valuable. And you can actually, purely from a commercial perspective, you can make money from it too. So there's a lot we can do as a country, and there's a lot of opportunities that's available, a lot of jobs available in the climate change space, in our ability to deal with climate change. And we can only do this through cross-collaboration. So I also would like to appeal to the people in Namoli. We're quite happy to come and talk to you about some of the opportunities that's available to you and how we can collaborate with you, with government, the different ministries can collaborate with you to be able to not only protect our environment, not only be able to mitigate some of the risks from climate change, but also in the process for you to make some money too. And I think that's a win-win situation for everybody. I'd like to thank everybody for the invitation and for such on such short notice putting all of this together. And I wish you all a very good day. Thank you very much.
Minister, Attorney-General, ladies and gentlemen, Bulavinaka, good morning. Thank you first of all for that very kind introduction, and thanks to everybody for letting me, my colleague Jean-Paul and his son be here today. Thanks to the Attorney-General for proposing the idea when we met earlier this week. It's a great pleasure to be here with you and to join in celebrating the Bar Youth Initiative under the organisation of Let's Save the World Fiji. As the introduction I've just had has suggested, much of what I've been doing here as High Commissioner has been focused on climate change issues, on biodiversity issues. Partly that is because, as probably everybody knows, in only 2 weeks' time we are hosting in the UK, in Glasgow, the United Nations Climate Change Conference, which is known as COP26, at which the countries of the world will come together. It should have been 5 years after the conference in Paris. It's now in 2015. It's now actually 6 years because the cycle was interrupted by COVID-19. But the countries of the world will be coming together to look at what we've done since the climate agreement that was signed in Paris in 2015, and we hope to agree on very strong steps going forward. Because one thing that is clear is that although the Paris Agreement was very, very important in terms of setting the framework for action in the face of the challenge of climate change, what we have done so far is inadequate. We all, as a world, we need to raise the level of our activity very, very significantly. I think we're moving closer to the kind of area where we need to be, but we're still a long, long way from it. And as presidency of this year's climate conference, we want the meeting in 2 weeks' time to be a turning point, the point at which the world's governments, the world's leaders start taking these issues with the seriousness they need, not just in terms of rhetoric and in terms of speeches, but in terms of action. So that's been very much the focus of what I've been working on here over the last months, and will continue to be a focus beyond the conference. The conference is maybe a milestone, but we're at the beginning of a long journey, and a journey that should end up with a different approach to how we run our economies and how we approach the world. And a very important part of that is a change in how we think about and how we work with nature. There's been a growing realization over the last years that both in the context of climate change, of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, in the context of protecting ourselves against the impacts of climate change, which is something that Fiji is very well aware of, with rising sea levels, with cyclones over the last years, and so on. In the context of protecting ourselves against climate change, we need to work with nature rather than working against nature. And part of that is exactly the sort of thing that we're seeing with this initiative. rebuilding mangrove coverage, forest coverage where it's been lost, because that can help. To protect us. It has benefits in terms of carbon storage. It has benefits in terms of in terms of providing the environment for fish, for crabs, and so forth. It's a win-win approach, and it's something that we need to make not just the subject of individual initiatives, but something which reflects our whole approach to our economies, to our lives, working with nature, because if we protect nature, nature will protect us. In the run-up to the climate conference in a couple of weeks' time, we have been reaching out in a number of ways to young people in Fiji and across the Pacific for a number of reasons. First, because young people are the leaders of the future. Secondly, because it's young people who will have to live with and work with the consequences of the decisions that are being taken now. And thirdly, because both the voice and the actions of young people can have a real impact. And I'm pleased that about 3 weeks ago we co-organised a meeting of around 600 young people from across the Pacific, a virtual meeting, which was named the Youth for Pacific pre-COP gathering. That is where this very brightly coloured Sulu that I'm wearing comes from. And those young people got together and produced a very powerful declaration about what they want to see being done by the world's governments, which will be fed into a youth meeting just ahead of the COP meeting and then into the COP meeting itself. But it's not all about what happens at government level, although the decisions taken by governments nationally and together at the conference are hugely important. Climate change and biodiversity, which I think are the biggest two issues that face the world as a whole today, those are issues that need to be addressed not just at government level, but at national level, at community level, and by each of us as individuals. And it's in that context that I think the Bar Youth Initiative, the decision to plant 50,000 mangroves to restore mangrove cover around Namoli is a really fantastic initiative. Something I want to express my praise and admiration for, and something I hope will be a catalyst for further action in this region and more widely in Fiji. So I would like, first of all, once again to say thank you for the invitation for us to be present here, to congratulate Let's Save the World Fiji and all the others who've been involved in this initiative, and to wish this initiative and further work that all of you will be doing the greatest possible success. Thank you very much for your attention.
Oh, very nice.
Very good.
3, 1, 2, 3. Thank you so much.
Better to be without food.
This side. Yeah,